Daniel wasn't supposed to be on that mountain road. The snowstorm had come out of nowhere. One minute the road was clear, the next it was white chaos. His old pickup struggled against the wind, headlights barely cutting through the storm. He had already considered turning back when he noticed a sleek black SUV stuck sideways near a ditch. At first, he almost drove past. He had his 6-year-old daughter waiting at home with the babysitter. Getting stuck here would ruin everything. But then he saw movement inside the SUV. Someone was still in there. Daniel cursed under his breath and pulled over. By the time he reached the SUV, the cold had already started biting into his bones. He knocked on the window. Inside sat a woman in an expensive coat, gripping the steering wheel like it had betrayed her. She rolled down the window slightly. "Do you mind?" she snapped, voice sharp despite the obvious fear in her eyes. "I have this under control." Daniel glanced at the spinning tires half buried in snow. "Yeah," he said calmly. "Looks like it." She didn't like that. Up close, it was clear she wasn't just anyone. Confident posture, designer watch, the kind of presence that filled a room. The kind of person who probably signed million-dollar deals before lunch. And right now, she was completely stuck. "I don't need help," she said. "Storm's getting worse," Daniel replied. "There's a ranger cabin about half a mile from here. We won't last long in these cars." She hesitated. The wind howled louder, rocking the SUV. Finally, she opened the door. "Fine," she said, brushing past him. "But if this is some kind of mistake..." "It's not," Daniel said. They walked through the snow together, the storm swallowing the road behind them. He noticed how she kept her distance, like she was used to controlling every situation, like trusting a stranger was the last thing she wanted to do. Neither of them knew yet that this storm would trap them together for 2 nights, or that by morning, everything about them would start to change. By the time they reached the small wooden cabin, the temperature had dropped even further. Daniel forced the door open. Inside it was dark, cold, silent. But it was shelter. The woman wrapped her arms around herself, shivering slightly now. "For the record," she said, still trying to sound composed, "this better be worth it." Daniel lit the emergency lantern inside. The light revealed her face clearly for the first time, and suddenly, he realized exactly who she was. Elena Carter, the CEO whose company had just laid off half the town, including him. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The storm raged outside, and the night was just beginning. The moment Daniel recognized her, the air in the cabin felt even colder. Elena Carter noticed the change instantly. She had built an entire career reading people in seconds. "What?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. Daniel looked away, setting the lantern on a dusty table. "Nothing. People don't say nothing like that unless it's something." He let out a slow breath. He didn't want to start anything, especially not in a storm like this. But the truth was already sitting between them. "You're Elena Carter," he said. She straightened slightly. "Yes. CEO of Carter Dynamics." A pause. "Yes," she repeated, this time slower. Daniel gave a small nod, almost like confirming it for himself. "Thought so." Elena watched him carefully now. And nothing." That clearly annoyed her. "Look," she said, crossing her arms. "If you have something to say..." "My job," Daniel said simply. Silence. The wind slammed against the cabin walls. Elena frowned slightly. "What about it?" Daniel met her eyes. "Not angry, just tired. I worked at the manufacturing plant your company closed last month." That landed. For the first time since they met, Elena didn't have an immediate response. "I see," she said after a moment. Daniel shrugged lightly, like it didn't matter. Life happens, but it did matter. She could see it in his face, and strangely, that bothered her more than if he had yelled. Elena looked around the cabin instead, shifting the topic. "Is there heat here?" Daniel checked the old fireplace. "No firewood inside," he said, "but there might be some outside if the snow hasn't buried it." She looked toward the door where the storm was raging like it wanted to tear the world apart. "That sounds terrible," she said bluntly. Daniel almost smiled. Yeah, it is. For the next hour they worked in silence. Daniel managed to find some frozen logs near the cabin wall, while Elena awkwardly tried to help despite clearly not being used to this kind of situation. Eventually, a weak fire started. It wasn't much, but it was something. Elena sat near it, rubbing her hands together. Her earlier confidence was starting to crack. The cold was getting to her. "You have a family?" she suddenly asked. Daniel glanced at her. "A daughter." "How old?" "6. Something softened in Elena's expression, but only for a second. "You were driving back to her," she said quietly. "Yeah." Another silence filled the cabin, but this time it wasn't hostile, just heavy. The storm outside got worse. The temperature kept dropping, and despite the fire, the cold was creeping in fast. Elena's shivering became more noticeable now. Daniel noticed. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said immediately. She wasn't, and both of them knew it. Another hour passed. The fire started weakening again. Then Elena's voice came out softer than before. "I think I'm getting really cold." Daniel looked at her, and suddenly realized the night might be far more dangerous than either of them expected. Before we continue the story, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if you ever love someone with your pure heart subscribe to this channel so you never miss the best stories. Daniel had seen cold like this before. Working winters at the plant meant early mornings in freezing air, hands numb before the day even started. But this was different. This was the kind of cold that crept inside your body slowly and didn't care if you were strong or not. Elena's hands were shaking now, not the small shiver she tried to hide earlier. This was worse. "Okay," Daniel said, moving closer to the fire to check it. "We need to keep you warm." "I am warm," she insisted, teeth slightly chattering. "You're not?" She tried to stand up, maybe to prove something, but her balance slipped for a second. Daniel caught her arm before she could fall. That was when he felt it. Her skin was freezing. Elena noticed the concern on his face. "Don't look at me like that." "I'm thinking," he said. "About what?" "About the fact that the fire isn't enough." The wind outside roared like it was enjoying their situation. Elena sat back down slowly. For the first time since he met her, she looked unsure. "What happens if the temperature keeps dropping?" she asked. Daniel hesitated before answering. "You could go into hypothermia." She didn't like that answer. "Fantastic." He ran a hand through his hair, thinking fast. The cabin was poorly insulated, the storm wasn't stopping, and the firewood wouldn't last the entire night. There was one option left. He didn't say it immediately. Elena noticed. "What?" she asked. Daniel sighed. "Body heat." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "It's the fastest way to keep someone from freezing when there's no proper heat." Her expression immediately hardened again, like the CEO version of her had returned. "That's not happening." "Then you might not make it through the night." Silence. The fire cracked softly. Elena looked away, clearly fighting with herself. She had spent her whole life controlling situations, setting boundaries, deciding everything on her terms. Now a storm had taken all of that away. Minutes passed. Her shivering got worse. Daniel didn't push again. He just sat there, watching the fire, giving her the choice. Finally, her voice came out quieter than he had ever heard it. "Fine." Daniel looked at her. "This doesn't mean anything," she added quickly. "It's survival." "Yeah," he said calmly. "Survival." They moved closer, near the fire, sharing blankets from an old emergency box in the cabin. At first it was awkward. Elena kept her distance even though the cold made that impossible. But eventually, instinct took over. Her body leaned closer to his warmth, and slowly, the shivering started to ease. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, in the middle of the storm, Elena whispered something he didn't expect. "You came back for me," she said quietly. Daniel looked at the fire. "Anyone would have." "No," she said softly, "not anyone." Outside, the blizzard continued. Inside the small cabin, Something between them had just begun to shift. Elena woke up slowly. For a moment she didn't understand where she was. The room was dim, the air still cold, and there was a strange heaviness in her chest. Then she realized it wasn't heaviness. It was warmth. Daniel. She was pressed against him, wrapped in the same blanket, his arms still around her like he had barely moved all night. The storm outside had quieted, but the cabin was silent enough that she could hear his breathing, and suddenly, the memory of the night came back, the cold, the fear, the moment she had agreed to something she would normally never allow. Elena carefully shifted, trying not to wake him, but Daniel's eyes opened anyway. "Morning," he said, voice rough from sleep. She pulled away slightly, instinctively rebuilding the distance she was used to. "Morning." For a second, neither of them mentioned what had happened. Daniel sat up first, checking the fire. "It survived," he said. "Barely." Elena rubbed her arms, noticing something strange. She didn't feel freezing anymore. Actually, she felt okay. Too okay. Her eyes moved back to Daniel. "Did you stay awake?" she asked. He shrugged lightly. "Some of it." Elena stared at him. "You kept giving me your body heat." It wasn't a question. Daniel didn't answer right away. He just added another small log to the fire. "You were really cold," he said. Something inside Elena shifted at that moment, because she realized something important. He hadn't done it awkwardly. He hadn't taken advantage of the situation. He hadn't even mentioned it. He just saved her. The man she had unknowingly taken a job from. She swallowed. "Daniel," she said quietly. He looked up, a bit surprised she used his name. "How did you know my name?" he asked. "You mentioned your daughter last night. You said it while you were half asleep." He nodded slowly. "Her name is Lily." Elena didn't know why that made her chest feel tight. "What happened after the plant closed?" she asked. Daniel leaned back against the wall. "Odd jobs," he said. "Trying to figure things out. No bitterness, no blame. And that somehow made it worse." Elena looked down at the floor, thinking about the meetings, the decisions, the reports. To her, it had been numbers. To him, it had been life. A long silence filled the cabin. Then something unexpected happened. Elena stood up and walked toward the door. "What are you doing?" Daniel asked. She looked back at him. "Helping with what?" "Surviving," she said. "You did it alone last night. Today we do it together." Daniel studied her face carefully. And for the first time since they met, she didn't look like a CEO. She just looked human. The storm had slowed down, but the world outside the cabin was still buried in thick snow. Rescue wasn't coming anytime soon. Daniel stepped outside carefully, checking the sky and the road that had completely disappeared under white silence. When he came back in, Elena was already trying to organize the cabin. It was almost funny. The woman who probably ran meetings with hundreds of employees was now dusting off an old shelf and counting emergency supplies like it was the most important task in the world. "We have enough food for maybe 2 days," she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You counted already?" "Yes." He nodded. "Good." She hesitated before asking, "Do you always stay this calm?" "Not always," he said. "Just when panicking won't help." Elena leaned against the table, studying him. Something about Daniel was confusing her. He didn't act like someone who had lost a job because of her company. If anything, he treated her like she was just another person stuck in a bad situation. That thought stayed in her mind for a while. Later, they sat near the fire eating simple emergency food from the cabin. Not exactly a 5-star meal. Elena made a face after the first bite. Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, it's bad. I've had worse," she said automatically. He looked at her, amused. "I doubt that." She was about to argue, then stopped. For the first time in years, she didn't have a clever response. Instead, she asked something else. "What's Lily like?" Daniel's face changed immediately. Not dramatically, just softer. "She talks a lot," he said, "about everything. Yesterday she called me because she found a ladybug and thought it needed a house." Elena smiled without realizing it. "She sounds amazing." "She is." That silence again. but this time it felt warmer. A few hours passed. They checked the radio in the cabin. Still no signal strong enough to reach anyone. The day stretched on. At some point, Elena tried to walk outside with Daniel to gather more wood. That lasted about 5 minutes. "This is harder than it looks," she admitted, breathing slightly heavier. Daniel smirked. "You're doing fine. I run a company," she said. "Not a survival camp. Today you're doing both." That made her laugh. Actually laugh. And that surprised both of them. Later, as evening approached, Elena sat quietly watching Daniel repair a broken lantern. Her mind kept returning to the night before, the way he had stayed awake, the way he had protected her without expecting anything. Finally, she spoke. "Daniel." "Yeah?" Her voice was softer now. "I think I judged you before even knowing you." He looked up. "That happens a lot," he said calmly. But Elena shook her head. "No, I mean really judged you." Daniel didn't say anything. And for the first time in a long time, Elena Carter felt something she wasn't used to. Guilt, and something else. Something that was just starting to grow. By the time night fell again, the cabin felt different. It was still cold, still quiet. The storm hadn't fully cleared yet, but something between them had changed during the day. The tension from the first night wasn't there anymore. Now there was awareness. Daniel added another piece of wood to the fire while Elena sat across from him, watching the flames. "I've been thinking," she said. "That's usually dangerous," Daniel replied. She gave him a small look. "Very funny." He smiled slightly. That smile stayed in her mind longer than she expected. After a moment, she spoke again. "When the plant closed, how did you explain it to Lily?" Daniel leaned back against the wall, thinking. "I told her sometimes adults make decisions that don't make sense right away," he said. "But we'll figure it out." Elena felt that sentence land deep inside her. "You didn't tell her it was because of my company." "What good would that do?" he asked calmly. She didn't answer. Because the truth was, most people would have blamed her, yelled at her, resented her. But Daniel hadn't. That made it harder. The fire crackled between them. "I read the reports," Elena said quietly. "Numbers, costs, losses. That's what I saw." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's how big companies work. But I never saw the faces behind those numbers." He looked at her carefully now. "And now you do?" Elena met his eyes. "Yes." The moment stretched longer than expected. Then Daniel stood up and grabbed the extra blanket. "Temperature's dropping again tonight," he said. "We should stay close to the fire." She knew what that meant. This time, though, there was no hesitation. They sat near each other under the blanket again, sharing warmth. But it felt different from the night before. Last night had been survival. Tonight felt more personal. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Elena quietly said, "You're not what I expected." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" "I thought you'd hate me." He shrugged. "I don't know you well enough to hate you." She let out a small breath, almost relieved. "Fair." Another silence. Then Daniel spoke, surprising her. "You're not what I expected either." She looked at him. "What did you expect? Someone colder?" That made her laugh softly. "Well, the storm helped." "Maybe," he said. Their shoulders touched slightly under the blanket. Neither of them moved away. Minutes passed. Then Elena's voice came out almost as a whisper. "Thank you for last night." Daniel looked at the fire. "You're welcome." And for the first time since they met, the quiet between them didn't feel awkward. It felt safe. But neither of them realized that by morning, the rescue team would finally arrive, and that leaving this cabin might be harder than staying in it. Daniel woke up to a sound he hadn't heard in 2 days. A helicopter. At first, he thought he was imagining it. The wind outside had tricked them before, but then it came again, louder this time. Elena opened her eyes almost at the same moment. "Did you hear that?" she asked. Daniel was already standing. "I think that's rescue." They both rushed to the door. When Daniel pushed it open, cold air filled the cabin, but this time the sky looked clearer. In the distance, a helicopter was circling above the snow-covered road. Elena stepped outside beside him, shielding her eyes. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. After 2 days trapped together, the outside world suddenly felt strange. "They found us," she said quietly. "Yeah." But Daniel didn't sound as relieved as she expected. The helicopter moved closer, and soon they heard voices from the rescue team approaching through the snow. Relief should have been the only thing they felt. Instead, something heavy settled between them, because both of them knew what happened next. Real life was coming back, and real life was complicated. The rescue team reached them, checking quickly to make sure they were okay. "You two are lucky," one of the rescuers said. "Storm like that could have gone very differently." Daniel nodded. Elena answered professionally, instinctively slipping back into the version of herself the world knew. "Yes, thank you. We appreciate it." Daniel noticed that. The confident CEO had returned, but not completely. As they prepared to leave, Elena turned toward the cabin one last time. 2 days. That small place had changed something inside her. Then she looked at Daniel. He was talking to one of the rescuers, explaining how they found the cabin. Calm, quiet, just like always. She suddenly realized something that made her chest tighten. After today, their lives might go in completely different directions again. When they finally walked toward the helicopter, Elena slowed down slightly so she could walk beside him. "Daniel," she said, "yeah, I don't want this to be the end of whatever this was." He looked at her, surprised by how honest she sounded. "This was a snowstorm," he said. "No," she replied softly. "It wasn't just that." For a moment, neither of them moved. The rescue team was waiting. The real world was waiting. Daniel glanced at her. "You live in a different world than me," he said. Elena shook her head. "Maybe I used to." That answer stayed with him. They climbed into the helicopter. As it lifted off, the small cabin grew smaller beneath them, the place where everything had changed. But the real question now was, what happens when two people who connected in survival try to face the real world together? 3 days later, Daniel was back to his normal life, which mostly meant trying to make things work. His small apartment was messy with toys. Lily was talking nonstop about her school project, and he had spent the morning searching for job listings again. The mountain storm already felt like something unreal, like a strange chapter that didn't belong to the rest of his life, until his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number. "Hello? Daniel?" He froze for a second. "Elena." Her voice sounded calmer than usual, but also different. "Hi," he said. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You're not." There was a small pause, the kind that happens when two people are trying to figure out how to talk outside the moment that brought them together. "I've been thinking a lot since the rescue," she said. Daniel leaned against the kitchen counter. "Yeah?" "Yes, about the plant, about the people who work there." He didn't say anything. Then Elena continued. "I visited the town yesterday. That surprised him." "You did?" "Yes, and I realized something important. Decisions made in offices don't always show the real impact outside of them." Daniel understood what she was trying to say, but he stayed quiet. Then she said something he didn't expect. "We're reopening a smaller facility there." Daniel blinked. "What?" "It won't be exactly the same," she explained, "but it will bring jobs back, real ones. And this time, I want to actually know the people behind the work." Daniel exhaled slowly, trying to process that. "And you're telling me this because I'd like you to come see it," she said. Another pause. "And also because," she added, softer now, "I want to see you again." Daniel smiled slightly without realizing it. "Lily would probably like that," he said. "Good," Elena replied. "Because I'd like to meet her." A week later, they met again. Not in a snowstorm, not in survival mode, just in real life. And somehow, it felt even more real than the cabin, because this time they chose to be there. Not because they were trapped, but because they wanted to see what could grow from the connection they found in the coldest night of their lives. Sometimes life forces people from completely different worlds to stop, slow down, and truly see each other. This story shows that kindness, sacrifice, and understanding can change even the coldest hearts. From this story, we learn that people are more than their titles, their money, or their past decisions. When someone chooses compassion and another chooses forgiveness, it can create something powerful and real. And sometimes, the storm that traps you is the same one that leads you to the right person.